Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Just an update for those of you who were following what I talked about yesterday. Things are being resolved. Number one, YouTube ruled in my favor concerning the copyright takedown notice, said that my videos were fair use and that there was no issue there. Secondly, I did have Oversimplified actually reach out to me really quickly after I posted about it. Very kind, very graciously said, listen, that shouldn't be happening. We're going to contact AdRev, who's the company who was making the claims. Everything seems to be getting sorted out. So kudos to Oversimplified for being all over that. Continue to be big fans of their channel, and they just kind of backed that up by showing how they kind of reached out to me really quickly. So I want to thank them for that. Everything's being resolved. YouTube's on my side. Oversimplified's on my side. AdRev's all alone. We'll deal with it. Anyway, let's dive into something new today. We're going to go to the channel Blue Jay. They don't have a lot of videos, fairly new channel, but already almost 500,000 subscribers. And this particular video is called How to Survive Victorian London. So I'm excited to dive into this, see what it's all about. See, I have no idea what to expect with this. Victorian London, when you hear those terms like Georgian, Edwardian, Victorian, Elizabethan, what they're talking about is the time period during that person's monarchy. So Queen Victoria, we're talking late 1830s to right at the turn of the century when her son becomes King Edward VII in 1901. So most of the 19th century would be Victorian era, the last 60 or so years. So let's see what it's all about.
Do you ever watch Downton Abbey and find yourself thinking, I should have been born in the Victorian era? Well, you're stupid. Firstly, because Downton Abbey takes place 11 years after the Victorian era, silly goose. And secondly, because life in Victorian London would be absolutely terrifying for someone accustomed to the luxuries of the 21st century. But let's say you somehow end up in a Freaky Friday situation and switch bodies with a bona fide Victorian. How are you going to survive the London streets? Not to worry. With my extensive background studying history, certified by my 90,000 Reddit karma, I'm here to teach you everything you need to know to survive the Victorian era.
So one thing I'll say right off the bat, I think a lot of people, when they think of the Victorian era in London, they think of the time of Jack the Ripper, right? That's 1888. That's kind of the image people have of Victorian London. And that's true. That is a part of Victorian London. But 1888's very different than, say, the 1840s. And London changes a lot throughout the Victorian era, just in terms of even things like sanitation and, just the overcrowding that happens later in the century with all of the immigration that's happening, especially on the East End of London. So it'd be interesting to see what part of the Victorian era he focuses on. Resro.
Alright, so you just finished your Disney Channel style body swap and have officially transported over a century back in time to Victorian London. Gah! What? What is it, James? My body? What's happening? It looks like during the body swap you've received a lethal dose of gamma radiation.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, and your hairline is receding. My hair? Oh yeah, actually 2 out of every 3 guys will experience some form of hair loss by the time they're 35. But about that radiation. How do I keep it? Alright, weird priorities. Well, really the best way to combat hair loss would be with Keeps. It's a fantastic doctor-recommended online service that offers clinically proven treatment to stop hair loss and improve hair growth. They're customer-focused with a 24/7 care and support network of expert medical advisors and care specialists at the ready to help you with any questions you might have. Whether you're looking to prevent hair loss, stimulate hair growth, or honestly, if you just want to take better care of your hair in general, Keeps is perfect for you. They even got award-winning shampoo and conditioner. When's the last time you won an award? Never? I know. Here you go. Now for the radiation. Well, at least they'll go out with luscious curls. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/bluejay or click that link in the description. That's keeps.com/bluejay. Thank you, Keeps, for sponsoring the video. Of course, Alex, you're gonna have to wait a few centuries until you've got internet again, as you're now in Victorian London. The city is booming from the results of the Industrial Revolution. The air is dense, but the stunning Gothic Revival architecture still manages to pierce through all the smog.
So yeah, Big Ben is the clock, not the clock, it's the bell and the clock, It's actually called the Elizabeth Tower. It wasn't called that then, but built right around the time of the American Civil War, late 1850s, early 1860s. So imagine you go back to the beginning of the Victorian era, 1840s, you don't see that. That's not a part of London's skyline.
It's a city of rapid expansion and expensive projects, starkly contrasted by the overflowing slums. But man, taking in all these new sights is really starting to make you thirsty. So you head on over to a well pump for a fresh sip of water. First mistake! What are you, crazy? You won't even survive a day here! You can't drink the water! Cholera outbreaks are about as common as an office quote in a Tinder bio.
Cholera was the pandemic fear in the Victorian era, and there were serious outbreaks of cholera. I think there was one in like the early 1830s, but they happened multiple times, and not just in London. They happened all over England. They happened all over the UK, all over Europe. They happened in America. Cholera may have been responsible for the death of a couple of our presidents, because the same thing was happening with the water in Washington, D.C., the water at the White House. Cholera was the tainting of the water, and it got into the water supply, and there's whole documentaries done on this, how London tackled this issue of cholera by dealing with their sewage and their water supply and all of that.
The booming population of London, combined with newly introduced indoor plumbing, resulted in overwhelming amounts of raw sewage. This sewage ended up in the Thames River, which happens to be London's main source of drinking water, thus completing the circle of life. During one cholera outbreak, John Snow, a supporter of germ theory, looked at all this sewage in their drinking water and had the hot take of, hey, what if we drink water, but without the poop? And ended the outbreak by ripping off the handle of a contaminated well pump. At the time, the community believed in the miasma theory, basically the idea that diseases were transmitted through foul odors. So government officials still rejected Snow's theory of fecal-oral transmission, stating, "Germs in the water? Don't be ridiculous. It was stinky air." And this wouldn't be the last time a Jon Snow's potential was shattered.
Oh man, different Jon Snow, but every time anybody talks about the Jon Snow of the Victorian era, there's inevitably the reference to Game of Thrones.
Unless you want to die a painful death, I suggest boiling your water, or just stick to hard liquor, where the alcohol would not only kill any germs, but also help drown that regret you're starting to feel for wishing to be in Victorian London, instead of shutting up and playing Wordle like a good little consumer. Alright, now that you're properly shit-faced, you're gonna need to pinpoint your social class so you know who you're allowed to interact with. But isn't who I am inside more important than some social class? No! Simply talking to a social class higher than yours is enough to get you arrested here. Luckily, it's rather easy to find out which one you belong to. For example, are you over the age of 25 and alive? Then you're probably not in the lower class, as male tradesmen and laborers had life expectancies of 25 and 22 respectively.
Now, it's important to note that when we're talking about life expectancy at this time, that is dragged down significantly by the infant and child mortality rates, which were just astronomical at the time. Some families lost as many as half of their kids by the time they were 5 years old. And so if you made it to adulthood, your life expectancy was significantly higher than 25. That doesn't mean it was high. A lot of these labor, you don't have the health and safety standards that you have today. And so, for example, in my family, we had a lot of iron workers, a lot of steel workers, and you see a lot of deaths in my family from bronchitis because they were breathing in the fumes from working in those hot conditions where there was a lot of burning going on, and kind of the refining of the steel. Or coal miners, same deal. My wife's got a lot of Hungarian coal and Welsh coal miners in her family tree, and you see a lot of death from lung cancers and things like that.
But let's say you find yourself a member of the respectable upper class. What can you expect from your newly found privileged life? Well, first off, you can kiss the thought of a hard day's work goodbye, because with the fortune your family has built over generations through certainly non-exploitive means, you'll never have to work a day in your life. So instead, you're gonna have to find out how to kill all this free time you got on your hands. Being a person with enough wealth to buy a handful of developing nations, or one GPU, you decide to use your money to give—
Wait. Is that a $60,000 video card? And why would... Oh my gosh, that's nuts. I don't even have that great of a video card in my computer, but geez.
Back to the poor people whose blood, sweat, and Fossey jaws helped you build your riches. So you buy tickets to next Tuesday's Freak Show. Freak shows were essentially the MCU of the Victorian era, loved by people of all ages and social classes.
We're very judgmental of that, and you got, in America, you got people like P.T. Barnum who did the same thing, and they're very exploitative of people like Joseph Merritt, who is known as the Elephant Man. But put yourself in that time period. Okay, number one, you don't have TV and movies and things like that. So what is your entertainment, right? Secondly, for people like the Joseph Merritts of the world, the Elephant Man, what do you have to do to make money, right? So we look at this and we think how cruel, how mean, but in some ways it was actually them being able to make a living and be cared for by using the resource they had, which was their birth defect or whatever it might be, like, this guy here. So it's easy to be judgmental of this, but it's kind of the time period they were in.
Except for pretentious people who prefer more refined entertainment, like seances. Everyone from your average Joe to Queen Victoria herself loved to goggle and laugh at all the different looking people performing. These freak shows showcase people with physical abnormalities, such as dwarfs, conjoined twins, giants, fat people, thin people, hairy people, ethnic people, and whatever else they thought would pique people's curiosity. Gather round, folks, gather round, for I'm about to unveil the wonders of the world. Realities beyond your comprehension. Freaks from distant and foreign lands. Meet the man of hair. The precious Piper Pinky. Oh my gosh, it's small. And behold, Paul. I thought this was a freak show. Oh, trust me, Paul's a freak. However,
and it's funny. This seems like a world away from the time we live in now, but I can remember as a kid going to carnivals that would come to town. We had a carnival in our town, our little town of 3,000 people. We had a festival once a year that went a week long. There were rides, and there were these things you could pay a couple bucks and go in and see the bearded lady and stuff like that. That stuff still existed 30, 40 years ago.
The reign of freak shows came to an end as reports of mistreatment of the performers came to light, and the public was furious to find out that the people they went to laugh at for being less than human were being treated as less than human. But now that you've reached your limit of being near the working class who aren't actively carrying your dry martini on a silver platter, it's time for you to build your social status with your fellow aristocrats. To do this, you're gonna have to capitalize on some of the trends of the time. No, not child labor, we'll get to that later. I'm talking Egyptomania. Napoleon's campaigns in Egypt brought back trade and artifacts to Europe, eventually igniting a craze for all things Egyptian in the West due to its perceived exotic nature. This craze peaked during the Victorian era, and Victorians sure had interesting ways of indulging in this trend, such as hosting mummy parties. Not the Brendan Fraser kind, they weren't that based. Specifically, they held mummy unwrapping parties. Getting your hands on a mummy was the easy part. You could literally cop one from street vendors in Egypt
Yeah, it seems, again, so super crazy to us, but this was a common thing that was happening. And mummies were so plentiful. I mean, there were tens of thousands of them they were finding, right? Because a lot of people were not like pharaohs. They were just, an ordinary, maybe middle-class person in Egypt that got mummified. They were using mummies for heating their homes, burning them, things like that. It was crazy how little they were valued. Nowadays, we think of how important these finds are. And of course, you go to the British Museum there in London, and you can see so much of this stuff that was brought back to England during the Victorian era.
A pin from Disney World, but unwrapping them required a trained professional called an unroller. Why exactly they had to hire a professional to do some glorified banana peeling is beyond me, but I can only assume that their training involved a significant amount of fruit by the foot. Essentially, a bunch of people would gather round to watch the unroller unwrap the mummy and perform an autopsy, including cutting into the skull to go, oh my god, look, he's got a brain, that's crazy. Fragments of the pungent mummy wrappings were then passed throughout the audience for their, pleasure, I guess. What am I supposed to do with this? Well, today we recognize hosting an unboxing party for corpses and disgracing a people's history.
An unboxing party for corpses. But true, though, again, think about the stuff that we do today that maybe 100 years ago or 100 years from now, people are going to look at and think, why were people entertained by that? Why did people think that was a good idea? Because times change, technology changes, entertainment changes.
History is the most optimal way to speedrun a Twitter hashtag. The Victorians just couldn't help but satisfy their intrigue. And in their defense, they basically came gift-wrapped. But if you need any more convincing on how evil this practice was, the most famous unwrapper was a surgeon named Pettigrew. But overall, in the upper class, you won't need to worry all that much about staying alive. Except for the arsenic in your walls, lead on your dolls, corsets in your torsos, cyanide in your photos, strychnine in your tablets, explosive bits of plastic, kitchens full of toxins, morphine for your youngins, mercury-coated hats, radiation from your glass, kerosene in hair products, and asbestos in just about everything. Good luck. But what if you aren't?
All of this is an important reminder of why some government regulation might be a good idea, right? These are all things that nobody really knew were bad for you at the time. But over time that got discovered, and there was investigations, and there were, people who figured out this stuff was bad to be exposed to, and it got regulated. So, I know a lot of us, especially people who lean conservative like I do, like to complain about big government and that kind of stuff, but some regulations are good things.
And asbestos in just about everything. Good luck. But what if you aren't lucky enough to live the life of a Victorian Scrooge McDuck, and instead you find yourself living la vida pobre in the working class? Hold off on the booze there, buddy. As tempting of a coping mechanism alcohol is, we gotta make sure you even survive childhood first. Let's put you in a humble family of 7 kids, and shit, 4 of your siblings just died. What? Oh yeah, nearly 60% of working class children died before the age of 5.
And there's why you have a life expectancy of 25. When you have that many that are dying at 2, 3, 4 years old, that's the way it goes. And it's amazing how one family could be hit massively by this and another one wouldn't. My grandpa, his parents both came from poor families in eastern Kentucky. His mom and dad grew up 10 miles apart from each other. They were born 3 years apart. His mom was the youngest of 14 children. His dad was in the middle of 12 children. His dad's family, all 12 children, 11 boys and a girl. They had 10 boys, then a girl, then another boy. All 12 reached adulthood in that family. His mom's family, 7 of the 14 died before they were 15 years old. And they were both farming families, lived in the same county, 10 miles apart, same generation. You just never know.
Good for you, champ. You won the coin toss. I need to lie down. So long as it's in a minor chimney, because it's time for you to get to work. I'm 5 years old. And about time you started contributing to the family, you lazy leech. Without child labor laws, working class kids started working as early as 4 years old. Now pick your poison, chimney sweeping or coal mining. Well, I suppose it's just a 9 to 5. 9 to 5? No. Victorian children were expected to work 12 to 18 hours a day. Gotta beat out that optimism early. Besides, you've only got that small stature for so many years. Companies have to capitalize on your ability to squeeze in the tight spaces while you can. Now, these are still your formative years, so we gotta make sure you choose the child profession that'll cause the least amount of physical and emotional trauma. There were a lot, but let's narrow it down to chimney sweep and coal miner, and weigh some pros and cons. As a coal miner, you can expect some permanent eye damage due to eye strain from the dark environment, respiratory problems from coal dust, permanent spine deformation due to stooping,
People forget, these coal mines were not necessarily big open rooms, right? My wife's grandfather worked in a coal mine in Indiana County, Pennsylvania as a kid, and he talked about 22 inches. They were laying on their backs in 22-inch spaces. Could you even wrap your mind around the horror of that? And there were regular cave-ins. A lot of his relatives died in those.
Of course, there was the occasional explosion or cave-in. But on the bright side, you're essentially playing the closest Victorian equivalent to Minecraft. As for chimney sweeps, say goodbye to the skin on your elbows and knees, as that's all getting scraped off. You'll experience some irreversible lung damage from all the soot, and there is a high risk of death from falling or getting stuck in the tight chimneys. But at least you can die happy knowing that when Mary Poppins comes out in 100 years, Dick Van Dyke will forever cement your profession as much cooler than it actually was. So assuming you survive your childhood profession, it's time for the big boy world. Now, I know the idea of living poor in a Victorian city is probably a terrifying concept, but don't worry, the Victorians actually put in some effort to help the poverty-stricken wastes of oxygen excuse me, less fortunate folk. For example, if you're homeless, you can escape the cold at a penny sit-up, where for the small price of 1 penny, you get to sit on a bench in a shelter for the night. Whoa, now.
They had legit, and I'm sure he'll talk about it, places where you could pay, and they had a rope strung out, and you could lay across the rope to go to sleep. It was crazy.
Don't get too crazy. You're not allowed to sleep here. What do you think you are, a human? You only paid for the privilege of sitting, and penny sit-ups even had monitors to ensure you didn't fall asleep. If you're looking to catch some Z's, you're gonna have to cough up an extra penny at a 2-penny hangover. Don't get too excited. Contrary to the name suggests, a 2-penny hangover is not a charity dive bar where you can drink yourself into an ethanol-induced coma. Instead, it was a rope.
Yep.
That you literally hung over. Not the most comfortable experience, but at least you'll be the coolest kid on campus with your minimalist hammocking setup. The rope was ideal because it allowed the staff to quickly, dispense with all the poor people in the morning. But hey, maybe it was a good day at the factory and you walked out with 4 pennies in your pocket, you little aristocrat you. Well, you can afford to be a high roller and head on over to a 4-penny coffin. Yep. While it may look like you just got shipped back from the Crimean War, a 4-penny coffin was quite the step up from a rope, to be fair. You got to spend the night in a nice coffin, you had a tarp to keep warm, and you even got assigned your own little serial number, which is undoubtedly the closest you'll ever get to being acknowledged in your life. Speaking of life, you better get used to this one, as people didn't exactly graduate from social classes.
And yeah, and that was the thing, and that's why, if you ever wonder why so many people came from these countries to America, even people who didn't have a lot. Like my most recent immigrant family, the Whitaker family that came from Glasgow, Scotland, they first were in Birmingham, Tipton, right outside of Birmingham in England. Then they go to Glasgow for 20 years, and then they come to Ohio. And it was like 2 years of wages for him as an iron worker to pay for the whole family to come to America. Why would they do that? Well, they did it because they knew that once they got here, they could have a chance to move up the social ladder. You didn't really have those opportunities in a place like Britain. And yet there were a lot of people that were coming there too. A lot of these people in London were immigrants, and they came to London. London becomes this largest city in the world, just overcrowded. And that's the situation in which you have Jack the Ripper, and you have these thousands of women who had nowhere else to turn, who turned to prostitution. And they would prostitute themselves just so they could get what was called their DOS money, which was that money to be able to pay for a room for the night. And then tomorrow they got to do it all over again just to make enough money just to pay to get through the night. It was a horrible existence, and there was really very little hope of it ever getting better.
So the only 4 walls you'll likely ever get to call home will be a coffin at best or a coffin at worst, if you can afford it. But on the bright side, if you manage to survive through the era, you'll get to experience many of the following significant discoveries and advancements. America found its second manifest destiny with the discovery of crude oil in 1859. Charles Darwin published his book on the concept of evolution, meaning that in a few centuries we may evolve past thinking crocs are cool. Darwin's half-cousin, Francis Galton, took this research and started modern eugenics, which led to problems. Alexander Graham Bell patents the telephone in 1876, a device that changed the world by allowing people to learn about their car's extended warranty. Germ theory would become accepted by the end of the Victorian era, and nobody would doubt doctors ever again. The 19th century saw many innovations in data visualization for statistics, which are used today for optimizing shiny Pokemon encounter strategies. The Bessemer process gave us bigger buildings for more people. Modern artillery gave us smaller buildings for less people. Radiation was discovered in 1896, leading the cancer treatment in Imagine Dragons. The Navier-Stokes equations were developed to describe the motion of viscous fluids and weed out chemical engineering students. And Carl Benz builds the world's first car while simultaneously killing the concept of peaceful suburban life.
Yeah, a lot of people still are under the misconception that Henry Ford invented the car. No, like a lot of things, he took what other people did and just made it better, made it easier to produce on an affordable scale. You know, flat screen TVs, we've really had them in our homes for what, the last 15 years at most. They've existed much longer than that. My grandpa told me in the early 80s when he was a TV repairman. He told me in the early 80s when I was like a 7-8-year-old kid about flat screen TVs. They existed then, but it was new technology and it hadn't been made affordable because they hadn't figured out how to mass produce it on an affordable scale. Why do you think TVs now are so much cheaper than they were 10 years ago? Because as the technology grows, it gets cheaper to make things. And Henry Ford found a way through things like the assembly line to make cars more affordable and more accessible to people. But they were invented in Germany.
And those are just a few of the significant advancements made during the iconic Victorian era. So, Alex, are you excited for your new Victorian life? You want to go home and play Elden Ring? Good boy. The Victorian era. Disgusting and deadly, but inspired Bloodborne. 3 out of 10 stars.
All right, that was really cool. I like his style. He's entertaining and also informative. We'll probably do some more of his stuff down the road. I'll put a link in the description if you haven't checked out Blue Jay. Definitely check out his channel. You can check out this video and the other ones. Like I said, fairly new channel. Doesn't have a lot of videos yet, but I'm sure more will be coming. But good stuff, and I'm excited to dive into more. Thanks for watching.